Our second reading this morning is from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 7, verse 24 to the end. From there he set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the little children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon towards the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately his ears were opened and his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered him to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. So many of you will know that reading the Bible isn't just an intellectual pursuit. It's not just something we do to engage our brains, but our hearts and our emotions too. The Bible is one of the ways in which God can speak right into our daily lives. It's not just a dusty old book of text. So when we open it up and look to learn from it, we'd better be prepared for the full workout. We'd better be ready to engage our whole selves in what we encounter there, and what a lot we have to encounter in today's readings. In our gospel passage today that you've just heard, it seems to me that what we first encounter is a quite weary, quite grumpy Jesus, who really could do with 5 minutes peace. He's been teaching, he's been feeding the masses, he's been walking on water, he's been healing the sick, facing up to the Pharisees, and everywhere he goes, there's these crowds pressing in around him, desperate to hear him, desperate to see him, to touch him. Everyone wants a piece of him. But it's all a bit much. So he heads out to the region of Tyre, which is right on the coast of what we now call Lebanon. And he's looking to escape for a while. So he goes in secret for a bit of respite, a chance to catch his breath and take in the sea air. But even there, people are looking out for him, and he gets recognised, and word of his whereabouts spreads, and this woman comes to him. We call her the Syro-Phoenician woman. Spell check has had some fun with that this week. And she comes with a request, desperate for Jesus to heal her daughter. You can almost hear him groaning, "Oh, there's just not enough of me to go around." And you remember me talking about that whole body workout that we need to do when we engage with Scripture? Well, this is the point at which we need to get our guts involved, to pay attention not just to what we hear, but to how it makes us feel. Because what Jesus says next is a little bit startling. He says to the woman, "Let the children be fed first, for it's not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." What he's essentially saying to this non-Jewish woman is, wait a minute, what have I got to do with you? My ministry is primarily for the Jews. And in doing so, he uses that horrible term dog to refer to people like her, to non-Jews. I don't know about you, but that makes me pretty uncomfortable. That doesn't sound like the Jesus I know. And when something in Scripture makes us uncomfortable, when we get that feeling in our guts, we need to pay attention. more attention, not less. We need to lean into that feeling and see where it takes us. That feeling has led some people to look at the story we've just heard and say, essentially, that Jesus meant what he said. They say that Jesus was intentionally being prejudiced, that he used a racial slur against a non-Jewish person. They say this is evidence of his full humanity and an unsurprising consequence of him growing up in first-century Jewish society. They go on to argue that the woman, with her clever response, brings him down a peg or two, corrects him, teaches him a lesson, and that her daughter is healed as a consequence. But that argument doesn't ring true for me. And actually, I think there are some quite serious problems with it. Not least of these problems is the basic fact that racism is not an endearing character flaw, not even in the young Jesus. Racism isn't the unfortunate side effect of being brought up a particular way. It is a sin. It denies the full humanity of people who I perceive as different to me, and it denies the marks of the Creator upon their lives. Racism is nothing less than sinful. There is no other word for it. And I simply can't conceive of the Son of God, who was present at the creation of the world and the creation of all its peoples, committing the sin of racism, only to be corrected by a chance encounter with a woman from Greece. It doesn't add up. It's also worth saying that by the time Jesus met this woman, he's already healed Gentiles in both Mark's Gospel and in Matthew's, where we also find a version of this story. So if he really had an objection to helping non-Jews, I think it would have come up before now. So I'm not convinced that this was some kind of learning moment for Jesus. I don't think he was committing the sin of racism. Nevertheless, we've got to listen to our guts. To our 21st century ears, the fact remains that what Jesus said is shocking and rightly makes us feel uncomfortable. So what's going on here? Well, interestingly, one group of people who probably wouldn't have had a problem with what he said would have been his disciples. In fact, if you look at Matthew's version of this story, the disciples find the woman so annoying as she begs for help that they demand that Jesus sends her away, gets rid of her. It's absolutely their expectation that he's not going to help her, that his mission is not for people like her. And I just wonder whether, when Jesus turns to address the woman directly, I just wonder if, alongside all the weariness and the desperation for a day off, maybe there's a little twinkle of irony and mischief in his eyes as he names what the disciples are thinking. I think it's fascinating that rather than just saying yes to her request, heal her, get rid of her, send her away, what he does is pushes for more. He names the elephant in the room. He says, come on, people like me don't do favours for people like you. And in naming that truth, in uncovering the insidious division and prejudice at play in the minds of his disciples and in the society they live in, he draws into the open that prejudice, and in doing so, he enables her to address it. And she's a smart one. She says, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Because she knows that there is a bigger truth than what society and Jesus' disciples were saying. She knows that there is room for everyone in God's kingdom. She knows that, depleted though he might have felt right then, Jesus' grace is sufficient for everyone, regardless of how others perceive them. And what I really love is that Jesus could have just turned this into an opportunity to lecture his disciples, to talk about inclusivity and how God's life and healing is for everyone, but he doesn't do that. Instead, in a situation where he holds all the power, he lets this woman take centre stage and name the bigger truth. He empowers her to subvert the dominant narrative, to demand better than what has been sold to her. And when she does, he blesses her with the only thing she cares about, the only thing she's interested in, the healing of her child. So no, I don't think this episode was a learning moment for Jesus. It probably was for his disciples, possibly for the woman as well, and it certainly can be for us today. Because as well as healing this woman's daughter, Jesus does for this woman and for his disciples the same thing that he does for the deaf man who appears a little later in the passage. He opens them up to seeing differently, to hearing differently, to thinking in a new way. And I think that phrase that he uses when he heals the deaf man, be opened, is so simple and so beautiful. It's such a perfect statement of what Jesus seeks to do in our lives. Be opened. And sometimes he does it for us, like he did for the deaf man. But sometimes what Jesus does is help us to see the ugly truth for ourselves. Because when you're living it and you're breathing it every day, all day, in and out of the weeks, you don't notice the sea you're swimming in. You don't see the prejudice and the injustice at play all around you. It just becomes part of the way things are. It's the furniture of life. But that's not good enough. And like he did with the Syro-Phoenician woman, Jesus shakes us out of our comfort zone. He names that uncomfortable reality that we put up with, and he demands a response. He gets us out of our heads and into our hearts. He draws our attention to injustice, and he empowers us not to settle for less. He empowers us to choose kingdom values over what the world wants to flog us. He challenges us to be opened. And that's what James is also trying to do in the section we have from his letter in our other scripture reading today. He's naming the prejudice at play in the congregation he's writing to as they privilege the rich over the poor. Some might call it unconscious bias, but James is determined to make them fully conscious of their actions and views, to force them into that place of discomfort and embarrassment so that they will do something about it. So I wonder what our guts might be telling us today. I wonder what uncomfortable truths Jesus might be looking to name in our lives about the things we believe, or the things we do, or the things we put up with. I wonder what he might be looking to drag into the light for proper examination. Let's notice that divine discomfort. Let's not just shrug it away, push it down, put it in a box and carry on as we did before. Let's listen to it, let's sit with it and see where it leads us, trusting that God has a truer, better story to tell over our lives and over the lives of the people we meet. Trusting that he can and wants to empower us to speak that better, truer story. Let's allow ourselves to be opened up to his transforming power, opened up to one another, opened up to his healing.